Okay, as we move on here to the next part, then of course I've just finished by saying, okay, that we really have to take consideration, or do we have to get consideration that, master identities and the notion of class is important to us. And I gave you the golf an example, or hopefully I've got you to think about it. Now next we would move on to look at, G matters or gender, and how gender actually might even solidify this concept of master identities. But of course, before we do that, we should remind ourselves, or we should rewind and remind ourselves, that basically in our digital age, what is the counterpoint again, or what's this big counterpunch? And it's the postmodern counterpunch, which we've already spoken about before. And of course, this should really reflect a kind of digital world, as I said earlier, that's your digital world. So the postmodern theorists, we should really remind ourselves of what they're saying, because they obviously challenge this notion of fixed identity, as we said earlier, and therefore they challenge the concepts of master identity. So they would go almost the other way to what I've just said. So this is this debate I need you to have in the classroom and with each other. To what extent are the postmoderns right, where identity is a project or a process, in other words, it's never complete, not a product, it's not as fixed as the master identity or the structural modernists would say. Okay, so the postmoderns would challenge that. They, remember, say that it's all about fluidity and fragmentation, and how identity is really a fragile thing. It's a constantly changing thing. It's like that, going through that butterfly change. So for them, remember, master identities are actually breaking down, and I think that is probably our core phrase there, breaking down. The debate that we'd probably have in the class is about, yeah, I can understand class, and we'll see in a minute gender, but it's to what extent and where are these master identities breaking down is the most notion of postmoderns coming in. Now, there's people in the classroom who are from other cultures, so if we think, and I've spoken about this before, people who come from Pakistan and who have a strong cultural identity, a strong religious focus, then for people with a strong religious conviction, identity is a lot more fixed, than you would think. So the kind of postmoderns, which would challenge, remember, post-structurists would challenge the very conceptions of any deity, any notion of God, for example. Now we know, as we look around the globe, and remember, you guys are digital marketeers, so you're in a global profession that's mobile, immediate, and instantaneous, and how that content that you generate will differ. So what I'm saying here, while identities, as it said here, are about the process of becoming rather than being, now is that traditionally a Western view, a modern as in a 21st century Western view? In other words, that it's not a case of who we are or where we come from so much as what we might become, and how we might how we have been represented, and how that bears in how we might represent ourselves. Now you can clearly see how digital and social media fit in, and how this fits clearly with a more postmodern view of identity being fluctuating and fractured and very much fluid. But I would then say to you, hold it a minute, that's fine if you are in the UK or say the US or maybe Europe in the West. If we go across to other nations and we talk about, for example, Pakistan or India, having just come back from there, concepts of identity, and maybe not so much class as they want to call it that, but they're far more fixed, because it's not as easy for people to move. It's not as fluid. So you have to think about that where you are in the globe, and you can see a trajectory, if you like. So I don't like to think class so much now as a hierarchy. I like to see it as a continuum, and that's more but that's more Western, moving from one side to the other. So you can move across the class spectrum, but can you do so in other countries? For example, say China, or say, for example, in as I say, in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh? That's a discussion for us. Because classically here again, we've got to say that we mediatize identity. That's the job or the game that we're in. In the world of digital and social media is really where we find this issue of postmodern re-enchantment. And here's the phrase from Maffesoli, neo-tribal identities. Neo-tribalism is about this idea where you can actually assimilate other identities. And Maffesoli coins this term of the postmodern neo-tribe, where you're no longer fixed to one particular tribe or class, if you think like that. It can be challenged, and also that applies for gender, as we'll see in a minute. and the media is central here. As we've said before, we are all about the prosumer, aren't we? This consumer creator who basically lives a convergent neo-tribe. We're off and online, as you'll see in a minute. So online, clearly, we can engage with people from all different backgrounds, all different cultures, from all different parts of the globe. And that then opens our minds, or does it not open our minds to challenging these very much fixed traditional notions and structures that shape our lives. So surely we're in the game of actually revolutionizing this. Because people have this, as we argue. People are all about a lifestyle identity, ones that are symbolically networked across social media and digital spaces. And the content that we produce reflects that, and the content that you will produce as a digital marketeer is one that would challenge all of these things, open the world and open people's eyes to the possibilities of not who they are in a fixed notion, but of what they can or could possibly be. Okay, I call that the matchstick girl syndrome, and we can talk about it later. Here's a classic way. I mean, really, offer online, it's all about this issue of desire. We desire these expressive sites of consumption. And don't they just show us, we've got some here where you've got things from Torture Garden to Farmville to Glastonbury, Second Life, parachuting and Burning Man, all of these aspects of lifestyle consumption. These are the things that demonstrates the currency of a postmodern lifestyle. These are the artifacts of meaning that we actually surround ourselves by. And as digital marketeers, is not part of our job, is to show people these things, and by showing them, it shows them a way of breaking free from what they are to what they could be. Okay, so that's the classic postmodern challenge for us. It's this: do we or do we not? Are we not in the game of creating distinctive content for the postmodern, that's the POMO lifestyle, that effectively describes as the material expression of an individual identity? So our identity is a postmodern construct increasingly. It's a lifestyle, it's a mishmash of possible identities. Is that, or is that not the case? And again, that's for you as groups and individuals to discuss. But remember, because there's a lot of cultural groupings in the class, speak to people who come from other different cultures, because they would say that, remember, it's not just about class identity, it can be gendered identities, and it can be ethnic identities, which we have in the room, and obviously age as well is often thrown into the master identity pot. So these postmodern guys, maybe they're being a bit too generous, in saying that this master identity stuff has disappeared. Because here's a classic one that I do quite like when we think about gender. And this is what we want to think about for you guys, because we want to shift to gender and talk about that. And I'm going to do that in a minute, because I want to finish off with gender, and we want to think about what gender is, because that brings us right back to this real problem of the shifting or the structuring aspects of identity, and how it's important for digital and digital marketeers, and how we generate digital content. So we're going to come back to this on the last section, which is coming up next.